We good up there? Okay, we got the sound and the video on. All right, today is Friday the 9th, and we're continuing with chapter 6. And again, we're still having troubles getting the videos uploaded and out there quickly. So if you get lost, any of you guys on the video stuff, just keep writing, taking notes. Actually, maybe talk to some of your students or text them and see if you can keep up that way too. So that's what's tough about this. Okay, the quotes up here. We played a video, music song by Garth Brooks, and it's very appropriate to the two. Please watch it. Take note on the lyrics. So meanwhile, we're back in the middle of chapter 6, and we got some topics that were mentioned as we got our independence. Our next big issue was how were we going to govern ourselves, and they come up with the republic form of government would be the best way. Now the issue is how to do it equally and fairly. And are we going to, and they suggest we will be looking at racial issues, the challenge of women's rights, along with the individual freedoms and rights and religion. And then we already talked about some people that spoke up that we need separation of church and state from our government, but we do not want to eliminate it. Today, they even suggest probably the three most natural rights that we could have as a country would contain to have religion or basis of religion in your government, the liberty of speech and the liberty of press. It's funny how they label it that way because, basically religion everybody understands, but speech and press is not too hard to understand, but you should be able to express yourself verbally, and then you should be able to take writing and be able to pass it around without being put down or persecuted or imprisoned. Even the majority of people don't believe or like what you write or what you speak about. You think about Jesus' time, you think about some of the philosophers of history that the other class is studying, and they all went through that, being very careful what they said. So, in order to keep the masses of people on your side, you've got to play some games. You've got to come up with some ideas, playing games to attract people to your side. You can see that right now in our political debates of who's running for president, what they stand for, and they're going to talk about it, or are they just going to slap each other in the face? So, same thing occurred to our new Americans, right during the end of the war, the Second Continental Congress was already, and the people that were in it, that we named some of those, like Thomas Jefferson, etc., just to name one, they urged that each of the colonies, in order for the republic to survive, each of the colonies establish a set of principles, rules, or, for a lack of a better word, their own state constitution. And when they adapt this first blueprint, so to speak, or working models, they started referring to everybody as a state now. State of Rhode Island, state of Massachusetts, state of Virginia, instead of colonies. Now, the question was, how are we going to represent each of the states in the so-called Congress, Right now, it's only been called the First Continental Congress and the Second Continental. Pretty soon, you have so many meetings with the Congress that you just drop the first, second, third. Oh, this 687th Congress in Mississippi. So they just call it Congress. So clear that out a little bit for you. Okay, how are we going to do this? Now, they were lucky in that 2 states already in their charters, when they became colonies and when they set up how they were going to govern themselves, they had, in their 2 charters, they had a form of a republic form of government, representation by the people, taxation only with the vote of the people. So, in your textbook, Rhode Island and Connecticut are the ones that already had these charters, and they represented republic form of governments. And so from this model, the other states decided that's a pretty good model, and they saw, oops, sorry, I forgot to turn my phone off. It's off, guys. Anyway, they decided to try and work their model for their states to follow after Rhode Island and Connecticut. Now, and they found out the number one thing was called natural rights. Now, that's the hard part. What is natural rights to some state versus another state, or one person in this room and another person? Okay, Nancy, you're the last one to arrive. What do you think is a natural given right for you? Speak up so I can hear you, and maybe it'll hit my mic. If not, I'll repeat. Natural right is? Yeah, you do. You're doing it right now. Yeah. It's a natural given right to be able to speak your piece or to speak how you feel, as long as, and then this is where all the problems, as long as you don't do this or cause this or this. But as a group, we're all represent a state in here. There happens to be 7, not counting me, 8 of us in here today. So we're represented the 8 states, which is the number that did this first, by the way. So we're going to have some free speech, so to speak, with limitations. Volunteer? What would be another one? I can pick on you. Okay, Audrey, you're not looking at me, so what's another? Natural right that you have. To be what? Okay. What's another word for that? Can't hear you. Quality? Oh, phew. Good thing I asked. Okay, equality, women rights. We should have a natural right of equality. Okay. Equality would cover, you would think, the racial issues, right? The restrictions that were put on women and on people of color. Even if there were some converted natural, what they call natural citizens, which are Native Americans, by the way, that blended into the colonies. Not a whole lot, but there were some. Okay, Cody? Got another one? There's dozens of them, guys and girls. The others keep thinking, maybe you can just fire one out. The right to travel? Sure. Yeah, to go where you want, when you want, and Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of natural rights. The way you dress, you know, the dialect you use. Y'all from the south or y'all from the north? You know, I mean, it's just a natural process. Uh, about religion. Um, Audrey was a Quaker, and you were a Presbyterian, but you should have the right to your religious views and whatever, meet as a group and etc. So those are natural given rights.
Whatever with like your own property. I guess like not like quartering trees and stuff. You don't have to do that here unless you can, have
Yeah,
Is that a right or not?
uh, it's a given right, but it has, as I'm going to get to, all these natural rights have to have rules and regulations. I'm glad you brought that up. You have some restrictions. Do you have the right? See, remember, we don't have the blueprint set up of the Articles of Confederation and the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. It's not too far away, but as she was saying, do you have the right to do what you want with your own property, within your own confines of what is your land and house? And then now, do you have the right to protect yourself? Um, Remember, most of the weapons and stuff were pretty crude compared to nowadays. But and I got to bring this up. I don't know if it came back out. These people were very well off, and they were on national news, and they were standing out in front of their house because people had come and protested and was threatening them. And one of them, the guy had a AK, and the lady had a pistol. I don't know if you saw that. And anyway, they got arrested for pointing the weapons and bearing arms to the protesters that were there to destroy their property. Now, they were given, they were found somewhat, well, they got to be found guilty because they got 4 months for doing what they did. And so keep that kind of stuff in mind. And that's what she was talking about, I believe, that, do we have the right to do that? Well, in our Constitution, we do. And I don't know if you're paying attention to Second Amendment. In your book, by the way, all the amendments are in there. But is this changing? And remember, we're going back to our textbook. This is when we're setting all this into stone, so to speak, putting it into writing and to follow these rules and regulations and laws so we can all, do it together. And that is really where the stumbling block is in your textbook. It says stumbling towards a new national government. Okay, as I was saying, we got the urge and the push to have state governments. Now, the next issue with that is how's that going to blend with Congress or a national government? And see, there's the next thing that comes up is, okay, we all agree, all the states have voted to agree to, at the very beginning, to have at least these natural rights. Now, the next big issue in forming all this together is, okay, should each state have the same number of representatives? And they go to the point where they say yes. And then you get a state like the shirt back there in New York. Or you get a state like Massachusetts that have more population than North Carolina or South Carolina. So the bickering starts. But they do agree on one thing. that our representation should be based on population. And then as you get into the Constitution, you'll see that so many representatives for the population of each state. And in our case now, the way it's evolved is everybody gets 2 senators. 1, 3. What is it? Yes. United States of America. We have senators and House of Representatives. Okay. This is how they get around it eventually. I'm jumping forward, by the way, but how many senators does each state have? Etched in stone. Doesn't change. Okay, what do you say? Okay, they're both right. 2 senators per state, no matter how big, how small. Now, in order to balance that out, they go to the point where representatives are based on population. So I don't even know the answer to this. Let's see if anybody, how many in this state, how many representatives do we have? Okay, I know we don't have as many as California, but we have more than Oregon. And it's based on population, not on state size or anything. So it's so many. Now, when you go to a convention and you see the state of Oregon proudly cast its 7 electoral votes for the next president of the United States. State of California, proudly cast its 48, I don't even know. But I do know that the states, as you look into elections nowadays, what's happening is they go and they campaign the major states like Texas, New York, Pennsylvania. They're really key states to have because it takes so many, 260 some, to become elected through the Electoral College, and we haven't even gotten to that yet. That comes later in American history. All right, so these are really the stumbling blocks. The next one would be how much power should the state government have versus the federal government or Congress have, and how much do we need to represent the common people? And I think it's easy for you to see if you had to do this from the beginning, like right now. We got to come up with a constitution for Gather for Him Christian College, and we got to have some bylaws, and we got to have some regulations, how we can run our classes. It's a little mini government in itself, even though it's a private Christian college. We still have rules and regulations. Are you allowed to do this or not? What's your steps for grievance? What's your steps for this? I'm supposed to know all that, if you ask me. Okay, now, in order to get this thing moving, the state of Massachusetts was the first state to step forward in Congress and say, we think everyone should have this many delegates, and we're going to be the first state on record to say, well, that number is, let's just say 2. Okay, and then you discuss it, and then that's when the person in the background, like Nancy, says, now, wait a minute, my state has 10 times more people than you. You get 2, and I only get 2. And so the majority, here's where that magic number, 8, adopted this first plan. It does fail, but you got to start somewhere and see how it works. So, as your textbook tells you, they come up with what they call the Articles of Confederation. What are the Articles of Confederation? What do they represent? Liz, did you read? Articles of Confederation is the first step to do what? Okay, what's that mean? Sovereignty of the states. Okay, the rights of each state. Okay, you go, and if you go to page 75, I'll just read it. In November 1777, Dickerson, by the way, I didn't even bring him up. John Dickerson is the one that proposed this earlier. Articles of Confederation jealously guarded the sovereignty of the states. The delegates who were drafted this framework shared a general Republican conviction that power, especially power so far removed from the people, was inherently dangerous, and the only way to preserve their liberty was to place as many constraints as possible on federal authority. Think about that. Even though our state capital is Olympia, and we're over here, don't you feel like lost? Think about it in this term, from here to Washington, D.C. You just feel like, how can my vote, how can I do anything? How can even my protest here in the Tri-Cities really help? So you have to build that. You have to build things, groups of people, commissions. I'm just flying for words, but it's like, in order for our voice to be heard, we got to have a strong local government. And the problem is, and it's political, and I'm going to say it anyway, without naming names, but does your representatives here that go to Olympia represent your wishes? Does your elected governor kind of represent what you believe? And if not, you do what Willie Nelson says, vote them out. Now you've got a governor here, and you have representatives and senators in the Congress or in state Congress, just like it's formed just after like the regular federal. And you can just continue that. For some people, it's very boring. I think for some of you students, it might be very boring unless you really take notice. Usually, again, I've said this before, you're usually not too worried until it affects you, bad or good. Yeah, I like that idea. I like the idea that all community colleges, not state colleges or four-year colleges, you will not have to pay a dime to go to a community college. What would that do? Everybody be going the first 2 years and get a lot of their classes out of the way free. Wouldn't you think? It would just overrun everybody. Now, CBC, a four-year school? We're a 2-year. You know? You don't? You can get a 4-year degree from CBC? I know you can WSU and U of W. You guys really don't know. So can you get a Bachelor of Education degree at CBC? But I did that on purpose. But anyway, that's the issue. Articles of Confederation, when it was first devised by John Dickerson, was the attempt to produce a framework for a national-like government, okay, our republic. They came up with specific ideas on population, taxation, to guard against too much control by any one group. And this is how many branches do we have in our federal government? Not a trick question, but we have a judicial branch, we have this kind of, we have branches and we have checks and balances. Who has the number one veto power? President can veto anything, but who can veto the president? Congress. That's his check. Who's the check on Congress? The president, the people, the electorates. But it doesn't always work that way. Now, in order to override a veto or something the president, it takes a majority of both houses. So now, this opens your eyes, I hope, to see how important it is that the president that's been elected have control of the House of Representatives and Senate. The majority are Democrat or Republican, or, it's supposed to be bipartisan. That would be the perfect model. Regardless if you're a Democrat or Republican, you're going to vote for what is best for everyone. But that doesn't happen, does it? Not hardly at all. And sometimes they rely upon those crossover votes, I call them, non-partisan votes. So you're going to see this happen when we vote here next week. I think it's going to happen on the new justice, Supreme Court justice. And it takes so many votes, and you know as well as I do, there are people just wanting to disrupt the process. And there's legal ways to do it and non-legal ways. And you're going to see that just before election. Will it happen or not? And there'll be a big fight. Not a physical fight, but there'll be a big verbal fight. So, but again, the point is, all this originated right now in our American history in the Civil War, Revolutionary War, 1775, 76, 77, 78, 79, and 80. All this is being established. Okay, the first Articles of Confederation also only established one legislative branch. It had no way to enforce their powers. They weren't sure if they could even control Congress, keep them from taking control and not listening to what the state governments had to say for each state. There was no way to enforce taxation. How is a government, a new republic government, going to run itself if they don't have money? You know what they did at first? They just took volunteer donations. So this is why the first actual plan failed. The Articles of Confederation. The preliminary plans, the Articles of Confederation, to the Constitution, established Constitution. And then, to be honest with you, as we finish, other things came into the cycle. Owning property, who could vote, the racial issue. Guess what? Some votes counted more than others already. People that had more power had more servants, slaves. And this is what's going to come to the next big boiling pot, would be the Civil War within America once we got established. Now, if we're going to base, last comment, if we're going to base representation on population, do we count everybody? That was the next big issue. We have, let's use state of Virginia again. We have 200,000 slaves. Do they count in the population? They don't get to vote, but do they count in the population because they live there? Now, if we're going to change the representation, how many we get in population, is that fair? You know, it's food for thought because we're going to start with that on Monday and continue chapter 6. But think about that. Does everybody get counted? They're supposedly due today. All right, thank you. Any questions for the camera people? All right, again, continue on chapter 6. We're about halfway through is all, so hopefully these videos get posted a little quicker than they have been and you get some more information. But anyway, the quote and the video song today match up really well. And hopefully everything's going well for you. Have a great weekend. Love you all. Bye.